Let's continue going over the integrals of prayer in the Lucid Word. The author says, the fifth integral is al-ruku', i.e. to bow or bowing. That means to bend over without bending the knees excessively. When you bow, if your knees are bent a little bit, then this is still a valid bow. Slightly bent knees do not take your position out of being called bowing or ruku'. Remember, in many cases, what you have to do is what that thing is called. You need to do whatever is, if you do it, then that doing of yours is the name of whatever it is you're supposed to do. So like we're going to see when it comes to sitting, for example, which way must you sit in the prayer? Well, you have to let your buttocks land because that's sitting, but with your feet in the front or what or how, Indian style or what, you have to do what's called sitting. And when you wipe your khufs, for example, what do you have to do? You have to do what's called wiping. What has that name? That's many things. So keep that in mind. Like that's a rule for you that's going to help you understand a lot of cases. Like here, the fifth integral is ruku', i.e. to bow, without bending the knees excessively. Why without bending the knees excessively? Because if you bend the knees excessively, then that's going to basically corrupt the position. It's not going to be called ruku'. The name ruku' won't be applicable to it if your knees are bent too much. But if they're just slightly bent, it will be still called ruku'. To the point until one's palms could reach his knees. Could means doesn't have to. So it's not a condition that your palms actually touch your knees when you make ruku'. That's not a condition. But it is sunnah. That's the prophetic practice. For your palms to actually reach your knees, and we're talking here not the fingers, but the actual palms, not the inner fingers only, but the palms upon your knees, with the knuckles of your fingers towards the qibla. If they were to put their palms on their knees, provided that their body parts are proportionate and free of deformity, meaning provided that one has average stature, average human stature. That means, like what it says here, provided that their body parts are proportionate. So he doesn't have, for example, very short arms. Like I remember when I was a little kid, when we used to go to the park, I used to see a lady. She has an arm, one of her arms like a baby arm, as if her arm never grew from when she was a baby. So not like this, for example. But what if a person had such a baby arm? Then he has to bend over like someone who has normal limbs. That's the meaning of this talk here. Provided that their body parts are proportionate and free of deformity. Therefore, it is not sufficient if one bows down until one's fingers only could touch the knees. And I would say take this word only here and put it before the word once so that it reads, therefore, it is not sufficient if one bows down until only one's fingers could reach the knees. The sixth integral is al-tuma'nina. Now this ruku' also, it's recommended for your back to be straight, for your back and your neck to be lined up like one board, and for your shins and your thighs, so basically your upper legs and your lower legs, to be like one beam. For your upper legs and lower legs to be like one beam, and for your back and neck to be like a board. This is the best ruku'. The sixth integral is al-tuma'nina, the tranquility or serenity after bowing. That means being still after moving for the duration of saying Subhanallah. And this statement here that's an approximation. You could say it in another way. You could say to be still in such a way that your coming up is isolated from your going down. So it's sufficient enough to go down, yani bend over, and then this position, this moving that you did, is isolated from, not connected to your coming back up. That's valid. The Shaykh expressed that here by saying, for the duration of saying Subhanallah, i.e., for each bone to settle in its place simultaneously. The tuma'nina, the tranquility, is for the limbs to settle into position. That's another way. So all those ways you can say it. If you do any of those wordings, it's valid. To be still long enough to say Subhanallah, or to isolate your coming up from your going down, or for your limbs to settle into position. The seventh integral is al-i'tidal. That means standing erect, straightness, i'tidal. And sometimes they call it al-rafa'. Al-rafa', that means rising. And sometimes they might say al-raf'u wal-i'tidal, rising and standing erect, which is to return to the position as one was before ruku'. Hence, if one was standing before ruku', then it is required to straighten up after ruku', and so forth. What does that mean? Meaning, well, what if one was not standing? What if he was sitting? Then the rule is, i'tidal means to return to the position you had before you made ruku'. So if you were standing before you made ruku', you return back to there. What if you were sitting? Then if you were sitting before you made ruku', then your i'tidal will be to return back to that position, yani to return back to the position you had before you made ruku'. So that's easy. And then when you learn more details, then you apply that rule. Like, what if a person's riding his animal and he's praying a sunnah prayer riding an animal, sitting on its back? So he needs to bend over for ruku', and then, so what's after ruku'? I'tidal, which means to go back to the position you had before you made ruku'. And then he needs to make sujood. So he's going to bend over more. And then what does he do? He has to go back to the position he had for his sitting before he bent over more. The eighth integral is at-tuma'nina in al-i'tidal. The ninth integral is to prostrate twice in each rak'ah. So the ninth integral, so that's one integral out of 17. The ninth one is what? Prostration twice. So that means both of them are being counted as one integral. Not each one is being counted as a separate integral. Okay. So keep that in mind too. All of these things interconnect. Because when you learn funeral prayer, it's going to be said that one of the integrals of funeral prayer is to say takbir 4 times. You know, you say takbir 4 times in funeral prayer. Saying takbir 4 times is one of the integrals of the funeral prayer. The ninth integral is to prostrate twice in each rak'ah by pressing all or part of one's bare forehead onto one's place of prayer. So they put the word pressing here. I think most accurate translation is putting as opposed to pressing. By putting all or part of one's bare forehead onto one's place of prayer, i.e. the place on which one prostrates. What do you call the place where you prostrate? That's called, anybody know? What do you call the place of your prostration? 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. The place of your prostration is called a masjid. Masjid. So where you put your forehead, that's your masjid. So that's very literal, because masjid literally means place of sujood. So by pressing, yani putting all or part of one's bare forehead onto his masjid, it says here his place of prayer. Yes, in the Arabic says his musalla, Musalla means place of prayer, place of salah. And masjid means place of sujood, i.e. the place on which one prostrates. Pressing or putting the forehead on the place of prostration is carried out in such a manner that if there were cotton underneath the forehead, the cotton would be compressed, yani it would be smashed, and the downward pressure of the forehead, that means the weight of the forehead, the natural weight of the forehead, would be felt on one's hand if it were underneath the cotton. So the natural weight of the forehead, or the natural weight of the head, that's enough. So it says pressing here, so someone might take that and then he'll say, let me press, and he pushes his face into the ground more. You don't have to. It's enough for you just to let the natural weight of your head settle. It is also a requirement that sujood is performed while keeping the lower half of one's body higher than the upper half. Tankis. Yeah. Yani, it means his rear end should be higher than his head. That's a condition. So according to saying that that's a condition, then if a person were to prostrate on steps, on a staircase, in such a way that his rear end is not higher than his head, then this is not valid. Along with placing even a small part of one's knees, part of the inside of one's hands, and the bottom part of one's toes. Yani, even we could say here, a bottom part of one's toes on the place of prayer. That's what's meant here. It says, even this A here, that's important. A small part of one's knees. Yani, so a part of the knees, and a part of the inside of the hands, and so the bottom part, yani a bottom part of one's toes on the place of prayer. This is valid. Why is it valid for a person to put even his fingertips, if he just put his fingertips, not his palms when he prostrates? If he just put his fingertips and he put just a little bit of his toes and his knees just a little bit, and he let the weight of his head settle, why that's still valid, that little bit? Because this position still has the name of sujood. So you have to do what's called sujood. So that's very important to think in this literal way like that. Do what's called such and such. You're going to do what makes you achieve this thing. You said, so the inside of the hand isn't necessarily the palm. The inside of the hand is the palm. The inside of the hand is the palm. You want to follow up with that? Yes. Let me come back to that. Let me come back to that, inshallah. If you remind me, please. You said the top of the fingers is okay. Yes. Why the top of the finger is okay? Tell me why. Because it will still be called sujood, hakadha. That's how you got to think about that. So now, here, if that question you're asking is going to block you from understanding that statement right there, throw the question away. Don't let something block you. Means I will answer you. I just want to benefit you. What you know, you need to make them comply. You need to make them merge. So if we say you need to put your palms when you prostrate, so it means like that's normal most of the time. You would say to a person, when you prostrate, put your palms down. Okay, no problem, fine. And you might not say anything about just putting your fingertips, because let's say, for example, you're just not going into details with a person. Now I'm just giving you some details that I can manage to pull out of my mind and give them to you. I didn't have to tell you that. So you're welcome. So yeah, you're going to put your palms, but now add here, if you want to be more precise, what you have to do is make sujood. So because what you have to do is make sujood, then even if what you actually put was just the tips of your fingers, it's still going to be valid, because it's still sujood. And those tips of your fingers are part of your inner hand, though. It's part of your inner hand. Yeah. Didn't we learn, for example, in purification, that you can use the liquid as long as, for purification, as long as it hasn't lost its name. If something gets mixed into it until you don't call it water anymore, now you can't use it. Why you can't use it? Because now the name is no longer applicable. It's not water. Now it's tea, for example, or something else. Okay. The author says here, unlike the forehead, comma, these parts are not required to be uncovered. That's the Shafi'i school, that the forehead has to be uncovered. Maliki school says the forehead can be covered, but not by something thick. If it's thick, like he has a thick turban wrapped, around his head, a thick towel, for example, wrapped around his head, so that his forehead's not landing, actually, then it's not going to be valid, even according to them. But according to a Shafi'i, your forehead has to be uncovered. Your forehead has to land. Some non-Shafi'i scholars, namely the Hanbali scholars, said that tenkis, that means for your rear end to be higher than your head, is not a condition. Therefore, according to this saying, comma, if one's head were higher than his buttocks while making sujood, his prayer would still be valid. So that's outside of Shafi'i school. And there's a saying in the Shafi'i school that if the head and the rear end are level, it's valid. So when you want to teach someone, let's say a beginner, and you're not going to give them details, don't go into these sayings. Maybe if you're reading this text here, you're going to read what's there. Or if, for example, because you've memorized your knowledge and you don't even have to rely on a book, and then you were able to teach a person, you said, oh, I know the 17 integrals by heart. Because the knowledge is in the heart, not the books. Then you would teach that person, and you might just say to him, when you prostrate, make sure your rear end is higher than your head. Period. No details. That's fine. He said, where does the forehead start and stop? Forehead starts, yani one end of the forehead is at the normal hairline, and then the other extremity is where the nose stops, or starts, depending on which way you're going. The 10th integral is tuma'nina, serenity in prostration. Also, I'd like to point out to you something, maybe I pointed it out before. It is argued that the word prostration is not really the right word here, and that the word prostration in English means to be laying down on your face. Laying face down is the real meaning of prostration. And someone who would say this, he's going to say, therefore, you should use kowtow. But I'm not going to use kowtow, I'm just going to say prostration. And that argument, as if it has merit. The 11th integral is to sit between the two prostrations. To sit between the two prostrations. So, what does sitting mean? Here, they didn't even give a detail. The 11th integral is to sit between the two prostrations. So, there's no explanation for that. So the explanation of that is that you have to do what's called sitting. And that means that your buttocks has to land. Yani your rear end has to land. That's sitting. How are your feet? That is not going to take what you're doing out of being called sitting. So if your feet are straight out ahead of you, if your feet are folded like what some people call Indian style, if your feet are another way, as long as your rear end landed, this is sitting and that's valid. And some of those sitting positions are actually the prophetic recommendation, but the minimum obligation is to do what's called sitting. The 12th integral is tuma'nina, serenity in this sitting. The 13th integral is to sit for the recitation of the last tashahhud. So before that, the 12th integral is the tuma'nina in this sitting. So how many instances of tuma'nina did we find? We found 4. So there's tuma'nina when bowing. So you're going to bow and be still for a moment. That's 1. Then you're going to stand up. You're going to rise up and stand erect and be still for a moment. That's 2. Then you're going to go down and prostrate and be still for a moment. That's 3. Then you're going to sit up between your 2 prostrations and be still for a moment. That's 4. So what did some of the Shafi'i scholars do? They said one of the integrals of the prayer is tuma'nina in 4 spots. Tuma'nina in 4 spots is one of the integrals of the prayer. That's how some of the Shafi'i scholars said. Like they said, 2 sujuds is one of the integrals of the prayer. So the 12th integral is tuma'nina in this sitting. The 13th integral is to sit for recitation of the last tashahhud. To sit for the recitation of the last tashahhud. And what follows that last tashahhud, namely as-salatu ala nabi, yani prayer for the Prophet. Or you could say prayer upon the Prophet. If you want to translate ala literally, prayer upon the Prophet. Or if you want to say a statement that maybe is more familiar, prayer for the Prophet. Praying for the Prophet, yani supplicating for him. As-salatu ala nabi. And the closing salam. Those all follow the last tashahhud. So the prayer for the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam is after the last tashahhud. Some scholars said it's with the last tashahhud. And with here means after. And then the closing salam, all of those have to be from the sitting position. You cannot say salam from a standing position or do tashahhud from a standing position. That's consensus. Tashahhud is not recited from a standing position. None of the scholars said that you can do tashahhud standing. It's just that some of them said you don't have to do tashahhud. That last sitting for the prayer is confirmed. That's how you're going to end the prayer. Last sitting. Do you have to do tashahhud there? Some of them said, no, sunnah. Others, they said, yes, obligatory, like what we're taking here, Shafi'i. And none of them said, tashahhud, yeah, and you can do it while you're standing. The 14th integral is the last tashahhud itself. Not the closing, not the sitting for it. Wherein one says, At-tahiyyatul mubarakat, as-salawatul tayyibatu lillah, Assalamu alayka ayyuhan nabi, ورحمة الله وبركاته السلام علينا وعلى عباد الله الصالحين أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وأشهد أن محمد رسول الله. So that's your complete tashahhud. The above is the optimal version of the tashahhud. That's nice. Yani, that's the best one. This is Ash-Shafi'i's version, meaning the one he chose from the route of Ibn Abbas. So, the above is the optimal version of the tashahhud. Question: is it permissible to say the tashahhud of another madhab while praying with the Shafi'i integrals? Yes, indeed. Any version of tashahhud is sufficient for a perfect prayer, regardless of which hadith is stronger. This hadith with this tashahhud is stronger than this one, so this is better one. Any version of tashahhud is good for perfect prayer. Or else one must say the minimum version of the tashahhud, which is At-tahiyyatu lillah, salamun alayka ayyuhan nabiyyu wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Salamun alayna wa ala ibadillahi as-salihin. Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah wa anna Muhammadar Rasulullah. And we see here in this publication we're reading, I'm looking, just scanning real quick. Here's the proper pronunciation is to be taught by a teacher. So the transliteration of these tashahhuds here was not offered here in this publication. And instead, you were forwarded by the footnote. The footnote prompts you. You want to know how to recite this? Because let's say you can't even read the Arabic. There's no English letters representing. It's telling you, go to a teacher. And that's fine. But I'll share with you something since we're here. I don't want to go too far in it because I want to save it for its place, insha'Allah ta'ala, but just give you a sneak peek here. Here, the tashahhud, here's the minimum tashahhud. I hope you can see my screen here. And it's transliterated here as a service. And here's the tashahhud of Abu Hanifa and Ahmed, and transliterated for you also as a service. And here's the tashahhud of Ash-Shafi'i, transliterated for you as a service too. And here's the tashahhud of Malik, and transliterated for you too. But now, for us to go through all of that is too far outside of obligatory knowledge lesson that we're reading. So when we get to, insha'Allah, the book of prayer level 3, insha'Allah, you can learn all these. We'll study together all of these tashahhuds bi'idhnillahi ta'ala. I ask Allah to enable us to do so. Ameen. The 15th integral is as-salatu ala nabi, prayer for the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wasallam. The minimum is to say Allahumma salli ala Muhammad. Here they took the time to transliterate for us though. Maybe because it's brief. Maybe because tashahhud has few sentences. They didn't want to put it. But it would have been helpful. So it wouldn't have been harmful. It would have been helpful. Even in a footnote, if you don't want to put it in the body, in a footnote would have been helpful. But that's fine still though. Go to a teacher and learn. The minimum is to say Allahumma salli ala Muhammad, or a similar phrase. like Sallallahu ala Muhammad. The 16th integral is the first of the two salams. The first of the two salams. Not both of them, only the first one is the integral. The second one is a prophetic recommendation, the minimum of which is Assalamu alaikum, and I say comma here and lowercase t here. The 16th integral is the first of the two salams, the minimum of which is Assalamu alaikum. The person is required to say the salam with the first word being definite, meaning Assalamu. So it's not valid to say Salamu or Salamun. Both of those are invalid. Salamu and Salamun, both of those are invalid. And the second word with the attached plural pronoun, alaykum, they bolded the M only there. Okay, according to a saying. According to a saying, the meme only is the pronoun. According to a saying, the kaf and the meme here. This word here. Bismillah. Alaykum. So the pronoun has to be attached. So according to a saying, the pronoun is kum, kaf, meme. But the way this is transliterated here, see how they made just the M bold? They're saying you have to make sure the pronoun is there, meaning alaykum, and the M is bold. So it's like they're saying the meme. You need to say that meme there. Alaykum. So that's a saying that the meme is the pronoun, not the kaf and the meme together. Also, it is a condition to observe succession without lengthy interruption between the words. Assalamu alaikum, without a pause between them, a lengthy one. The 17th integral is to observe the aforementioned order of the integrals of prayer as previously enumerated. Therefore, comma, intentionally neglecting the order, the sequence, by prematurely bringing forward a verbal integral, namely the closing salam, or a physical integral, such as intentionally prostrating before bowing, invalidates the prayer. Hold on, if you have a question, hold on. Owing to one's disregard of the prayer's sanctity. Okay. We need to unpack this a little bit. The 17th integral is to observe the aforementioned order. Order means sequence of the integrals. The aforementioned order of the integrals, as previously enumerated. Yes, but if you observe closely, if you probe here, you would realize, yani, if you take these words only by their face value, then looks like it means there's 17 integrals, one after the next, one after the next. You have to keep them in order. But if you probe here and you look carefully, you would notice that it's not really the case that these 17 integrals are all one after the next, one after the next. Because some of them are at the same time. Some of the integrals are simultaneous. Like what? Like saying the takbir and making the intention. Those are simultaneous. So even though when we start, we're going to say number 1 is the intention, number 2 is the takbir. And then we get down here, 17 is to keep the order as mentioned. But with closer inspection, you know that Yani, we could say that's a broad statement because some of the integrals are actually simultaneous. And like standing, we say number 1, the intention, number 2, takbir, number 3, standing. All 3 of those are at the same time. And tashahhud and sitting are together. And like that, yani, you can look more. I won't go into all the details there. But if you look yourself, because you've learned, and this is a review, then you'll see which ones are simultaneous and which ones aren't. So the 17th integral is to observe the aforementioned order of the integrals of prayer as previously enumerated. Enumerated means listed, 1, 2, 3, 4, etc. But some of them are actually simultaneous. Therefore, intentionally neglecting the sequence, now it says here, by prematurely bringing forward a verbal integral, namely the closing salam. Now, I'm not sure what's in the Arabic here, because I don't know if this is in the Arabic. Namely the closing salam. So let's say it's not, because it's in parentheses. Being in parentheses looks like it's not really in the Arabic. So if we just take that out and then read this, it says, therefore, intentionally neglecting it means the sequence, by prematurely bringing forward a verbal integral or a physical integral, such as intentionally prostrating before bowing, invalidates the prayer. So if you leave it like that, then this is confusing. If you leave it like that, then this is confusing and even potentially misleading. And I saw it in more than one book, and I was confused until, alhamdulillah, by the help of Allah, I studied and I compared different things. And then I realized what was happening, that some of them are saying a statement that's not the most accurate statement, but looks like as if it's approved because it's repeated in different spots, but really is not the most accurate statement. That's why they had to squeeze something in here to ward off the confusion, because when you say a verbal integral, that means any verbal integral, but that's not the case. So, I'm going to read it this way. Therefore, and the way I'm reading it is not to alter the book, but to give you the actual rule. I'm going to read it in a way that gives you the actual rule. Therefore, intentionally neglecting the sequence by prematurely bringing forward the verbal integral of the closing salam, the verbal integral of the closing salam, or any physical integral, bringing forward any physical integral, and bringing forward the verbal integral of the salam in particular among the verbal integrals, such as intentionally prostrating before bowing, this invalidates the prayer. But as for another verbal integral, there's 5 verbal integrals: the takbir, Allahu Akbar, the Fatiha, the last tashahhud, the prayer for the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and the salam. So if someone, for example, advances the tashahhud out of its place, or he advances the prayer for the Prophet, and he brings it before its place, this will not invalidate the prayer, but that advanced verbal integral will not be valid. It will not invalidate the prayer, but the integral won't be fulfilled when you put it out of its place, owing to one's disregard of the prayer's sanctity. However, if one forgets to perform an integral, they must return to it, i.e. the forgotten integral. Alright, I want to stop here. Inshallah, we can continue next time from this 17th integral. We'll repeat, inshallah, this 17th integral, and then we'll go from there. Any question? You said, if one added wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, is that sunnah? Yes. But is it sunnah for the first salam or for both salams or what? There's some talk there. Inshallah. Hopefully, if Allah enables us to do level 3, Book of Prayer level 3, then we'll see those those sayings. Amin wa fikum. Yeah, if you want, no, the first one. Do the first one. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. You said, if you see someone's aura showing whilst you pray behind them, do we need to tell them to repeat the prayer? I haven't heard. We'll ask inshallah.
Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum assalam. But hold on. But though, if that person didn't believe you, if he believed that he got out of his prayer validly, and then you told him your aura was showing, and he wasn't believing you, he doesn't have to believe you. And if he got out of his prayer believing that he fulfilled all the integrals and conditions, then his prayer is valid concerning himself. In his own right, his prayer is valid. Yes, brother.
No, that was about to say that happened to me. Musalla, Ali was behind me, and the shirt came up and he tapped me, pulled it down, and kept going after I asked him. He said your prayer is valid. It's okay.
Yeah, but I'll mention the rule for you, which is the person is obligated to enter into the prayer able to do all moves without the aura becoming exposed. So if he did enter into the prayer able to do all moves without the aura becoming exposed, and then the aura became exposed out of his control, and then he recovered it immediately, his prayer is still valid. But if he entered into the prayer unable to do all of the moves without his aura becoming exposed, then here he's been negligent. So when his aura is exposed, his prayer is invalid.
Okay, so I got another question from the beginning. I asked you about what was the scholars saying?
Yeah, the scholars, they said, as a rule, anything without which you can't do an obligation, anytime there's an obligation, and you can't do that obligation without doing something else, then that something else is an obligation. So how do you give an example of this rule? An example is, if your obligation was to stand on the roof, then getting a ladder is going to be an obligation too. For example, that's an example. Or whatever it is that enables you to achieve that obligation, that's going to be an obligation too. That's why, wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullah. That's why when we wash our organs in wudu, we have to go past the organ a little bit. That's obligatory, because we're not able to do the obligation without adding that little bit. That's why when the woman covers her face, when the woman covers, she has to cover a little bit of her face. She's not obligated to cover her face, but she does have to cover a little bit of her face, because that's the way she's going to verify that she fulfilled the obligation of covering everything else but the face and the hands. And like that. When we cover the aura, the man, he has to cover between his navel and his knees. He has to cover a little bit of his navel and a little bit of his knees, actually, not because they're aura, but because he needs that to actually verify the completion of the obligation. So anything that without it you can't do an obligation, then that thing is an obligation too. Tayyib. Any other question? You said, is the Shafi'i madhab more stronger than the other madhabs? That answer, the answer to that, whether that's a yes or no, is disputable. Someone might say yes, it is, but it's still disputable to say so. Because what happens is, I'll tell you what happens. So you'll have the layman, the beginner, like ourselves. So the beginner, he can't really distinguish. He just learns the knowledge. And he learns that there's different sayings. And so he might take this saying or that saying. As someone elevates in the knowledge, then he becomes understanding of rules. Not, yeah, when I say rules, I don't mean just the details like you learn as a beginner. I mean like clockwork rules. Like how I'm telling you. The name of something, that's a rule there, so broad. You see it repeating different places. So that rule is put there, that's actually is a clockwork, part of something bigger. So when someone gets higher knowledge, then he starts to understand some broader rules that make things turn. So when someone gets up in these areas here, then now here the people also, they vary. Some of the people, they start to comprehend these rules. And then, so when they comprehend these rules according to what? According to their minds, right? They comprehend these rules according to their minds. Okay. So Shafi'i has such rules. Abu Hanifa has such rules. Malik has such rules. For example, all these madhabs, they have these rules that make their madhabs work. So those scholars are getting higher in knowledge, and let's say they know 2 madhabs or 3 madhabs, for example, in a strong way. What they start doing, they like in their own mind, they say, okay, I'm not a mujtahid. I can't do what Shafi'i can do, or what Malik can do, or what Abu Hanifa can do. But just when I look at their arguments, so he might say, Shafi'i's argument's just stronger. It's his outlook, though. Doesn't mean really, that's why it's disputable. Because another one might say, no, Malik's so strong. But so you'll find, though, so what happens, like, maybe some of those, when they get high, so many of them, they say Shafi'i school. They go to Shafi'i school, for example. But it's not a condition. So I hope you understand where I'm trying to get to. So someone might say Shafi'i school's stronger, but that's disputable. Yani, look at our Shaykh Abdullah. He knows all the 4 schools. He's a mufti in all the 4 schools. Why choose Shafi'i school? And look at what you know of him as a very precise and cautious scholar. He's an accurate, cautious scholar. Why did he not propagate Maliki school more? It's for something that he sees, because he can. He's completely qualified to propagate Maliki madhab from beginning to end, to spread it to us like we learned Shafi'i school, but he gave us Shafi'i school. طيب.
Shaykh, may I ask you a question outside of this lesson?
Yes.
What is the difference between speculation and doubt?
The difference
is something.
The difference between speculation and doubt in fiqh, not talking about aqidah. In fiqh, the difference is that a speculation, which is a dhann, is what you deem most likely, or basically is what you deem probable. The speculation is what you think is probable. Probable means more likely. Doubt here means neither side is more likely. When we talk about a speculation or a doubt, we're talking about comparing 2 things. Those 2 things are basically true versus false. True or false? So you have these 2. You're weighing them against each other. So when true weighs more than false to you, then that's your speculation. When neither of them weighs more, then you're doubtful. When false weighs more than true, that means you're skeptical. And that's all relative. Because wherever you settle, I might not settle. When you settled on a doubt, I might have settled on skepticism. Or where you were skeptical, I might have a thought that it's right, presumption, or whatever word we said. Is that clear? Amin wa iyyakum.
You said when false weighs more than truth, it in reference to doubt. What did you say?
When false weighs more than true for an individual, then that's skepticism.
Okay.
Because that means you're saying, I don't think it's true. But when we're saying skeptic, that means it could be true, though. It could really be true. When we're saying you're skeptical, that doesn't mean that it's not true. It means you don't think it is. You as the assessor, you're assessing it as most likely false.
Mm-hmm. What did you mean?
Your voice stopped, so if you're talking, I don't hear you.
You said this is a DHULN or M matter in reference to fiqh.
Okay, I'll repeat all of it for you. I'll tell you all of them. You have 5 levels. One is to know something truly as it is. So that's knowledge. Second is to think that it's true. So that's dhann. That's a supposition or speculation or supposition. That's when truth, it weighs more to you as the assessor. It's relative. When truth and falsehood weigh the same to you as the assessor, that's called doubt in fiqh, not in aqidah. So we're not talking about belief here. When falsehood weighs more than truth to you, that's called skepticism. And when you don't know something at all, that's ignorance. And if you're ignorant of your own ignorance, then you have misconception. That's clear?
Clear, yes, Shaykh. Barakallahu. Thank you.
You're welcome. Subhanaka Allahumma wa bihamdik. Ashhadu an la ilaha illa anta astaghfiruka wa atubu ilayk.